The sun hung over Miami like a molten gold coin, casting a searing, brilliant light across the waters of Biscayne Bay. It was the kind of heat that vibrated in the air, a thick, humid blanket that promised late afternoon thunderstorms. But aboard the Biscayne Empress, a 180-foot marvel of gleaming white fiberglass and polished chrome, the atmosphere was one of manufactured perfection. The yacht, a floating palace owned by the DeMarco family, sliced through the turquoise water with an arrogant grace, its wake a temporary scar on the serene surface. They were leaving the city's jagged skyline behind for a private weekend jaunt to the Bahamas, an exclusive affair for the family's closest allies and business partners. On the aft deck, under the shade of a sprawling canvas awning, a curated world was in full swing. Ice clinked in crystal glasses, the murmur of conversation was punctuated by light. Confident laughter and the scent of expensive perfume mingled with the salt of the sea. Kayla Robinson stood near the railing, a flute of champagne held loosely in her hand. At 28, she possessed a quiet intensity that often made people underestimate her until it was too late. Her hair was styled in intricate box braids that fell past her shoulders, and her simple but elegant sundress was a splash of vibrant orange against the deck's sea of pastel linens and navy blazers. She was a journalist, a damn good one, and she was here as the guest of her best friend. But even in the sweltering Miami heat, she felt a distinct chill. She and her boyfriend Jamal Turner were the only black faces in this rarefied circle of Miami's old money elite. It wasn't overt, never a direct slur or a pointed remark. It was in the lingering glances that held a moment too long, the slight, almost imperceptible tightening of a smile when she was introduced, the way conversations would subtly shift when she and Jamal approached a group. They were a novelty, a testament to their host's supposed progressiveness. They were on display. Jamal stood beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back. He was a force of nature in the courtroom, a community lawyer who fought for the disenfranchised with a fire that could melt steel. But here, surrounded by the very people whose corporate decisions often created his clients' problems, he was a coiled spring. His handsome face was set in a polite, neutral mask, but Kayla could feel the tension radiating from him. His crisp white shirt seemed to constrict him, his tailored suit jacket a piece of armor against unseen aggressions. He kept patting his pocket, a nervous tic she'd noticed developing over the past hour. "You okay?" she murmured, leaning into him. "Just soaking in the ambiance," he replied, his voice a low rumble. His gaze swept over the crowd, men with leathery tans and women with surgically enhanced youth, all chattering about portfolios, regattas, and summering in the Hamptons. It was a world away from the sweltering, non-air-conditioned community centers where Jamal spent his days. A few yards away, Aiden, Jamal's younger brother, leaned against a support column, sketching in a small notebook. An artist with a soul too sensitive for this environment, he'd only come because Jamal had insisted. His eyes, however, rarely left Kayla. It was a look of quiet, melancholic adoration that he thought he hid so well, a secret he'd been nursing for years, ever since he'd first introduced her to his brother. "There you are," a bright, effervescent voice cut through the air. Nia DeMarco, the youngest scion of the DeMarco clan and Kayla's best friend since college, glided towards them. She was a photographer, her artist's eye a stark contrast to her family's ruthless business acumen. She wrapped Kayla in a hug that smelled of sunscreen and lilacs. "Isn't this divine? I told you Daddy would be fine with you both coming." Nia was their bridge to this world, their shield. She seemed genuinely oblivious to the subtle undercurrents of racial tension, or perhaps she simply chose to ignore them. To her, Kayla was just Kayla, the most brilliant and loyal friend a person could ask for. "It's beautiful, Nia. Thank you for inviting us," Kayla said, her smile genuine for the first time that afternoon. "Nonsense. You're family," Nia insisted, linking her arm through Kayla's. "Come on, Daddy's been asking for you." She led Kayla towards a shaded seating area where the patriarch Augustus DeMarco held court. He was a man carved from granite and ambition, with piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. He was known for two things: developing half of Florida's coastline and crushing anyone who stood in his way. He rose as Kayla approached, his smile as wide and predatory as a shark's. "Kayla, my dear," he boomed, his voice a gravelly mix of old money accent and boardroom authority. A pleasure to finally have you on board. Nia speaks of you as if you hung the moon. Mr. DeMarco, the pleasure is all mine. Your yacht is incredible, she replied, her professional composure clicking into place. He gestured for her to sit, his eyes doing a swift professional appraisal. Nia tells me you're one of the sharpest investigative reporters in the state. A noble profession, holding truth to power. He paused, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. But it's a dangerous one, too. You have to know where the lines are. A good journalist knows what story to chase, and which one to leave buried in the swamp. His smile never wavered, but the warmth had vanished from his eyes, replaced by something as cold and dark as the deep ocean beneath them. He was talking about her job, but the words felt less like advice and more like a beautifully packaged threat. In that moment, the gentle rocking of the luxury yacht felt suddenly, sickeningly precarious. The sun began its slow, dramatic descent, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange, pink, and deep violet. The oppressive heat of the day softened into a balmy evening breeze, and the staff of the Biscayne Empress lit tiki torches around the deck, their flames dancing in the twilight. The mood shifted from polite afternoon chatter to a more relaxed, celebratory evening vibe. A live jazz trio began to play a soft, languid melody that drifted out over the water. Jamal took Kayla's hand. "Come with me," he said, his voice now stripped of its earlier tension, replaced by a profound seriousness. He led her away from the small crowd, towards the very bow of the yacht, where they could stand alone, the wind whipping through her braids, the endless expanse of the Atlantic before them. The city lights of Miami were now just a faint, distant glimmer on the horizon. "It's breathtaking out here," Kayla said, leaning her head against his shoulder. For a moment, all the unspoken tensions of the day melted away, leaving only the two of them, suspended between the vast sky and the deep sea. "Not as breathtaking as you," Jamal murmured, turning to face her. He took both of her hands in his grip firm and warm. The nervous energy was back, but this time it was different. It was the energy of a man standing on a precipice, about to take a life-altering leap. "Kayla," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "From the first day I met you, in that dusty little coffee shop Aiden dragged me to, I knew my life had just been split into two parts, before you and after you. The after has been the only part that's truly mattered." Kayla's breath hitched. She saw where this was going, and a wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over her. Behind them, she was vaguely aware that the music had softened and the chatter had died down. Nia, ever the orchestrator, had clearly given a signal. They were the center of this universe now. Jamal's eyes, dark and earnest, held hers. "You challenge me, you inspire me, and you make me a better man. You fight for people who can't fight for themselves, and you do it with a grace and a fire that leaves me in awe every single day. I don't want to spend another day of my life without you by my side." He slowly sank to one knee on the polished teak deck. From the pocket he had been nervously patting all day, he produced a small velvet box. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. He opened it, revealing a stunning diamond ring that caught the last rays of the dying sun and fractured the light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. "Kayla Robinson," he said, his voice shaking just slightly, "will you make me the happiest man on earth? Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Kayla's eyes, blurring the perfect heart-stopping scene before her. For a few seconds, she couldn't find her voice. She could only nod, a frantic, ecstatic motion. "Yes," she finally managed to whisper, the word carried away by the wind. "Oh God, Jamal, yes!" He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for an eternity, a wide, brilliant smile breaking across his face. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. As he rose to his feet, the deck erupted in applause and cheers. He pulled her into a deep, passionate kiss, and for that perfect moment, there was no DeMarco empire, no racial undertones, no buried secrets. There was only the promise of a future, shining as brightly as the diamond on her finger. Nia was the first to reach them, her face beaming. "I knew it! I knew it!" she shrieked, hugging them both. "We have to celebrate!" Champagne corks popped and glasses were refilled. The jazz trio swung into a joyful, upbeat number. But as Jamal's friends and even some of the DeMarcos' associates came forward to offer congratulations, a familiar, unwelcome pressure began to build behind Kayla's right eye. It started as a dull throb, a distant drumbeat of pain. She subtly pressed her fingers to her temple. "You okay?" Nia asked, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "It's just a migraine starting," Kayla admitted, her voice low. "The excitement, I guess." The sudden shift from intense stress to intense joy was a classic trigger for her. "Oh, honey, not tonight," Nia said, her expression instantly shifting to one of deep concern. "Don't you worry. I know you sometimes forget your meds, so I packed your spare case for you, just in case. It's in your cabin, the pink pill box, right? I'll go grab it for you right now. You stay here and enjoy your moment." Nia gave her a reassuring squeeze on the arm before disappearing toward the ship's interior. Alone in Kayla and Jamal's assigned stateroom, Nia flicked on the soft lamp. The room was opulent, with a king-sized bed and a private balcony. She quickly located Kayla's vanity case. Inside, nestled amongst makeup brushes and skincare bottles, was the familiar pink plastic pill box. Nia's hand went to her own purse, which she'd set on the bed. She pulled out an identical pink pill box. For a long, silent moment, she stood there, the two small containers in her hands, her reflection staring back from the ornate mirror. Her breath was shallow, her knuckles white as she gripped the boxes. Then, with a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, she opened both. She carefully tipped a single capsule from her box into Kayla's, and then took one of Kayla's capsules and placed it into her own. It was a simple, silent exchange that took less than 10 seconds. She snapped both boxes shut, slipped her own back into her purse, and took a deep, steadying breath before heading back out to the party, a look of practiced concern etched on her face. Nia reappeared on deck a few minutes later, her face a mask of frustration. She pushed her way through the well-wishers clustered around the newly engaged couple. "Kayla, I am so sorry," she said, her voice laced with genuine-sounding annoyance. "I can't find it. I've looked everywhere in your vanity case, even in the bathroom. It's not there. You must have forgotten to pack the spare." Kayla's heart sank. The dull throb behind her eye was now a relentless, pounding hammer. The lights from the torches and the ship's lamps seemed to splinter into painful shards, and the joyful music was becoming a cacophony. "No, I'm sure I packed it," she mumbled, trying to think through the fog of pain. "Maybe it fell out." "Don't worry," Jamal said, his arm tightening around her. "I'll go with you. We'll find it." No, Kayla insisted, forcing a smile. This was his night, their night. She wouldn't let her chronic ailment ruin it. "You stay here. You're the man of the hour. I have my main supply in my purse in the room. I'll just go take one and lie down for 5 minutes. I'll be right back, I promise." She gave him a quick kiss, the pressure in her head making even that small movement an agony. "Don't let them run out of champagne before I get back, fiancé." She turned and made her way towards the glass doors leading inside, navigating the crowd with a practiced grace that belied the pain she was in. Jamal watched her go, a flicker of concern on his face, but he was immediately swallowed by Augustus DeMarco, who clapped him on the back and insisted on a toast with a ridiculously expensive bottle of scotch. The walk down the plushly carpeted corridor to her stateroom felt miles long. Each step sent a jarring shockwave through her skull. She fumbled with the keycard, her hands shaking slightly. Finally, the small green light flashed, and she pushed the heavy door open, stepping into the cool, quiet sanctuary of the room. A profound sense of relief washed over her. She kicked off her heels and went straight to her handbag, which sat on a velvet armchair. She rummaged inside, her fingers quickly finding the familiar contours of her primary pill box. A different color, a simple blue one. She clicked it open, shook one of the capsules into her palm, and walked over to the minibar. Her hand trembled as she poured a glass of bottled water. She tossed the capsule into her mouth, took a large swallow of water to wash it down, and then drank the rest of the glass, hoping the hydration would help. She sat on the edge of the bed, closing her eyes and taking deep breaths, waiting for the medicine to kick in. Usually it took about 15 minutes. She just needed 15 minutes of darkness and quiet. But something was wrong. Almost immediately, a strange, tingling numbness began to spread across her tongue and lips. It wasn't the usual aura she sometimes got with her migraines. This was different. A metallic taste filled her mouth, A wave of dizziness washed over her, so powerful she had to grip the edge of the mattress to keep from falling. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm. She tried to stand up, to call out for Jamal, but her legs felt like lead. A terrifying weakness was spreading through her limbs, a heavy, paralyzing blanket. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog in her brain. This wasn't a migraine. This was something else, something terrible. She tried to scream, but her throat had seized up. No sound came out, only a choked, gurgling gasp. Her vision started to tunnel, the edges of the luxurious room dissolving into blackness. Her last conscious thought was of Jamal's face, smiling at her on the deck, the diamond on her finger sparkling under the sunset. Then, the blackness consumed everything. Her body convulsed once, violently, and she slid from the bed onto the thick, soft carpet, her eyes wide open, frozen in a silent, final scream. Up on the deck, 15 minutes had passed, then 20. Jamal was growing increasingly worried. He politely excused himself from Augustus DeMarco's long-winded story about a hostile takeover in the 90s and headed inside. "I'm just going to check on Kayla," he told a passing Nia. He walked down the same quiet corridor. When he reached their stateroom, he noticed the door was slightly ajar. "Kayla," he called softly, pushing it open. The living area was empty. "Honey, you in here?" He walked toward the bedroom. The sight that met him would be burned into his memory for the rest of his life. Kayla was lying on the floor. Her beautiful orange dress was crumpled beneath her. Her face, usually so full of life and fire, was a pale, slack mask. But it was her eyes that broke him. They were wide open, staring at the ceiling with a look of sheer, uncomprehending terror. "Kayla!" The name was ripped from his throat. He rushed to her side, falling to his knees, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch. "No, no, no, Kayla! Wake up!" He pressed his fingers to her neck, searching desperately for a pulse. There was nothing. Just still, cooling skin. A guttural roar of anguish and horror erupted from deep within his chest, echoing out of the room and into the silent, indifferent hallway. The sound was so primal, so full of pain, that it cut through the distant music of the party. A few guests in nearby cabins opened their doors. A crew member came running, but the first person to arrive, drawn by a professional instinct honed over 2 decades, was a man in a simple linen shirt and slacks who had been quietly observing the party from a distance all evening. Detective Marcus Thorne of the Miami-Dade Robbery Homicide Bureau was officially on vacation. But as he stepped over the threshold and took in the scene, the body, the hysterical fiancée, the overturned water glass on the nightstand, he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that his vacation was over. He noted the glass immediately. It was completely empty, bone dry, sitting perfectly upright next to her body. A person dying in convulsions would have knocked it over. Someone had been meticulous. This was no accident. This was a murder. The Empress of the Seas was no longer a vessel of leisure. It had become a floating crime scene, a gilded cage sailing in the dark, international waters between Florida and the Bahamas. At Detective Marcus Thorne's insistence, a demand backed by the steely authority of a man who had stared down killers far more intimidating than a yacht captain, the ship was sealed. No one on, no one off. The captain, a man named Henderson, whose primary skill was appeasing the whims of the wealthy, had sputtered about jurisdiction and maritime law, but one look into Thorne's cold, determined eyes had silenced him. The killer was on this ship, and Thorne was going to find them. He commandeered the ship's small, wood-paneled library, transforming it into a makeshift incident room. Within an hour, he had the crew manifest, the guest list, and a timeline of the evening's events sketched out on a piece of parchment paper he'd torn from a decorative desk set. The ship's doctor, a harried man named Peterson, confirmed Thorne's initial suspicion. While an official autopsy was impossible at sea, the victim's fixed dilated pupils and the faint cyanosis around her lips pointed away from natural causes. "It looks like some kind of rapid-acting neurotoxin," he'd said, his voice trembling slightly. "But I've never seen anything like it." Thorne's first interview was with Jamal Turner. They'd given him a sedative, but it had barely touched the edges of his grief. He sat slumped in a leather armchair, his face a hollowed-out mask of shock and pain. He recounted the evening in a flat, broken monotone. The the party, the proposal, Kayla's migraine, her decision to go back to the room alone. "Did she have any enemies, Mr. Turner?" Thorne asked, his voice gentle but firm. "Anyone who would want to hurt her?" Jamal looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and lost. "Enemies? No. She was a journalist. She wrote tough stories. People got angry, they sent letters, made threats online. But nothing like this. She was uncovering things, big things. She always was." "What was she working on recently?" "I don't know the details," Jamal whispered, shaking his head. "She was always so careful. She said it was about land development, corruption, something dirty happening out in the Everglades. She called it Project Canary. She said she didn't want to tell me more until it was solid, to protect me." He choked on the last two words, the irony a fresh, brutal wound. Next came Nia DeMarco. She had perfected the role of the grieving best friend. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and she clutched a damp tissue in her hand. She recounted her part in the evening flawlessly, Kayla's migraine, her own fruitless search for the spare pillbox. "I just don't understand," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I searched her vanity case myself. The pink box wasn't there. I swear it wasn't. Who could do this? She was the best person I knew." Thorne watched her, his expression unreadable. Her grief seemed authentic, visceral, but in his line of work, he'd seen Oscar-worthy performances from the guiltiest of souls. "Her latest investigation, Ms. DeMarco, did she discuss it with you?" Nia looked up, a flicker of something, surprise, fear, in her eyes before it was gone. "We talked about everything, but she was being very secretive about this last one. She said it was dangerous. I begged her to be careful. She conveniently omitted any mention of her family's deep involvement in Florida land development." Finally, Thorne brought in Aiden Turner. The artist was a wreck, but in a different way from his brother. Where Jamal was hollowed by grief, Aiden was vibrating with a nervous, frantic energy. He couldn't sit still, his hands constantly twisting a napkin into shreds. He avoided Thorne's direct gaze, his eyes darting around the room, as if searching for an escape route. "Tell me about your relationship with Ms. Robinson," Thorne began. "She was my brother's fiancée," Aiden stuttered. "A good friend?" "Just a friend?" Thorne pressed, leaning forward slightly. "Witnesses said you barely took your eyes off her all night." Aiden flinched. "I admired her. She was brilliant. I was happy for them, for my brother." The words sounded rehearsed and unconvincing. His alibi for the time of the murder was weak. He claimed to be wandering the decks, looking for inspiration, seen by no one in particular. He was cagey, evasive, and hiding something. He looked, for all intents and purposes, like a guilty man. After the interviews, Thorne went to the crime scene himself. The stateroom had been sealed. He stepped inside, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the chaos of its discovery. He meticulously examined everything: the half-empty bottle of water, the blue pillbox from Kayla's purse, which he bagged as evidence. He saw her laptop on the writing desk. He powered it on. It was locked, protected by a password. Standard. But his eyes scanned the rest of her belongings, which the crew had been instructed not to touch. Tucked away inside her main suitcase, beneath a stack of neatly folded clothes, was a secondary, smaller travel laptop. A burner. He opened it. This one, too, was password protected. But as the home screen lit up, he saw a single, unsecured text file on the desktop. It was a simple, glaring oversight, the kind a person makes when they're rushing. The file was named Project Canary Notes. Thorne clicked it open. It was a jumble of thoughts, contacts, and outlines. His eyes scanned the text, his heart rate quickening. There were references to shell corporations, falsified environmental reports, and illegal dumping. And then he saw it, a name that made the pieces of the puzzle click into place with an audible, sickening snap. The notes detailed a massive illegal land grab scheme in the Everglades, designed to pave the way for a new luxury resort complex. The entire operation, according to Kayla's meticulous research, was being orchestrated by one company, DeMarco Holdings. He now had a motive, a billion-dollar motive. The investigation wasn't just about some abstract corruption. Kayla Robinson had been on the verge of exposing her best friend's family as criminals on a monumental scale. The warm, bubbly Nia DeMarco suddenly looked very, very different. The second day at sea dawned gray and oppressive, the sky mirroring the mood that had settled over the Biscayne Empress. The jazz music was gone, replaced by a tense silence broken only by the hum of the engines and the hushed, fearful whispers of the guests. Detective Thorne felt the pressure mounting. He was a lone lawman on a private island of wealth and influence, and he could feel the DeMarco family's invisible power working against him. Captain Henderson was becoming increasingly obstructive, constantly reminding Thorne of the prominent guests on board and the need to resolve this unfortunate incident quickly and discreetly. The translation was clear. Find a convenient scapegoat and don't rock the billion-dollar boat. The most convenient scapegoat was currently sitting across from him in the library again. Aidan Turner. Thorne had recalled him for a second interview, deciding to apply more pressure. The young artist looked as if he hadn't slept, his eyes shadowed and haunted. "Let's try this again, Aidan," Thorne said, his voice low and devoid of sympathy. "You were in love with your brother's fiancée. She gets engaged, and an hour later, she's dead. You have no solid alibi. You look me in the eye and tell me that's all just a tragic coincidence." Aidan visibly crumpled under the direct assault. The nervous energy dissolved into raw, painful honesty. "Yes," he whispered, his voice cracking. "God, yes, I loved her. From the first moment I saw her. She was everything, bright and fierce and kind. I introduced her to Jamal thinking, I don't know what I was thinking. I should have told her how I felt, but I froze. And then I saw the way they looked at each other." He looked up, his eyes swimming with unshed tears. "I couldn't get in the way of that. He's my brother. And he was happy, truly happy for the first time in years, so I buried it. For 3 years I watched them, and I painted, and I pretended to be the happy little brother. But last night, seeing him put that ring on her finger," he trailed off, shaking his head. "It felt like the end of the world." "A world you didn't want to live in?" Thorne pushed. "No!" Aidan's head snapped up, a flash of anger cutting through his despair. "You think I would hurt her? Never. I would have done anything to protect her. Seeing her married to my brother would have been torture, but a world without her in it at all? That's not just torture, it's a void. I wouldn't do that. I couldn't." Thorne studied him. The pain was real, the grief palpable. It didn't feel like the performance of a killer. It felt like the agony of a man who had lost everything twice over. "So if you wouldn't hurt her, what are you hiding, Aidan? Because you are hiding something." Aidan hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. He chewed on his lower lip, a war raging within him. Loyalty to his brother, fear of the DeMarcos, the ghost of the woman he loved. It all churned in his gut. "Last night," he began, his voice barely audible. "After she went back to her room, I followed her. Not all the way. I needed a minute. I went down to the corridor of the staterooms. I was going to knock on her door to just, I don't know, congratulate her properly alone. But I couldn't. It felt pathetic. So I just stood at the end of the hall in the shadows." He took a shaky breath. "I was about to turn and go back up to the party, and then I saw her." "Saw who?" Thorne asked, leaning in, his voice a low command. "Nia," Aidan whispered, the name tasting like poison in his mouth. "I saw Nia DeMarco. She wasn't coming from the direction of the party. She was coming from the direction of Kayla and Jamal's stateroom. She didn't come out of the room, she was just in the hallway near it. She was walking quickly, almost running. She didn't see me. She looked terrified, like she'd just seen a ghost." Thorne felt a jolt of adrenaline. This was it, the first crack in Nia's perfect story. She wasn't on the upper deck the entire time. She was downstairs, near the scene of the crime, at precisely the right moment. "Why didn't you say this before?" Thorne demanded. "Because it's Nia DeMarco," Aidan burst out, his voice rising with a frantic edge. "Her family owns this boat, this city, everything. Accusing her it's suicide. And what if I was wrong? What if there was a simple explanation? I didn't want to make things worse for Jamal." Thorne stood up and paced the small room. Aidan's testimony placed Nia at the scene. The Project Canary file provided the motive, but it was still circumstantial. He needed something concrete, something that tied Nia directly to the murder weapon itself. He thought about the poison, a rapid-acting neurotoxin, the doctor had said. Rare, sophisticated. Not the kind of thing you buy on the street. Where would a society photographer get her hands on something like that? The answer, he knew, would not be found in Miami's high society circles. It would be buried somewhere in Nia DeMarco's past, in a place she thought no one would ever think to look. The ship's small medical bay was cold and sterile, a stark white contrast to the opulent mahogany and brass of the rest of the yacht. Dr. Peterson, looking exhausted and out of his depth, handed a printout to Detective Thorne. He had spent the night running toxicity screenings using the bay's advanced, if limited, equipment. "I found it," the doctor said, pointing a trembling finger at a complex chemical compound name on the page. "It's a derivative of aconitine. It's an alkaloid neurotoxin, extremely potent, extremely rare." "Speak English, Doc," Thorne said, his eyes scanning the technical jargon. "It comes from a plant," Peterson explained, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Commonly known as wolfsbane or monkshood. But this variant, it's specific. It's found in a subspecies, Aconitum uncinnatum, that grows almost exclusively in the wetlands and cypress domes of the Florida Everglades. It's not something you just stumble upon. It requires careful extraction and processing. A single milligram can cause respiratory paralysis and cardiac arrest within minutes. The Everglades. The word hung in the sterile air like a ghost. Kayla's investigation. DeMarco Holdings. The pieces were no longer just connecting. They were fusing together with the heat of a welder's torch. A poison from the very land Kayla was trying to save, used to silence her. The poetic brutality of it was not lost on Thorne. "So, our killer isn't just a murderer," Thorne mused, his mind racing. "They're a botanist, or a chemist." Armed with this new information, Thorne retreated to the library, the ship's reluctant nerve center. He had been in constant encrypted contact with a tech specialist back at the Miami-Dade precinct, feeding him the data from Kayla's burner laptop. The specialist, a young genius named Martinez, had been working through the night to bypass the deeper layers of encryption on the main files. Just as Thorne sat down, a new email pinged in his secure inbox. Subject: "Canary is singing." Thorne opened it. Martinez had done it. He'd broken through. The attachment contained a trove of decrypted files, scanned legal documents, bank statements from offshore accounts, surreptitious audio recordings, and geotagged photographs. It was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, all laid out with Kayla's meticulous precision. He spent the next hour absorbing the sheer scale of the DeMarcos' criminality. For years, DeMarco Holdings had been illegally draining and poisoning protected wetlands in a remote section of the Everglades. They used a series of shell corporations to hire disreputable chemical disposal companies to dump toxic waste, knowing it would kill the native flora and fauna, rendering the land unviable as a protected habitat. Once the environmental damage was done, their lobbyists in Tallahassee would argue for the land to be delisted from federal protection, allowing DeMarco to swoop in and purchase it for pennies on the dollar for their next sprawling resort. It was a monstrous multi-million-dollar scheme that had destroyed an irreplaceable ecosystem, and Kayla had it all. The bank transfers, the falsified EPA reports, even a damning audio recording of a DeMarco executive bribing a state land commissioner. She had enough to not just ruin the DeMarco name, but to send Augustus and his entire board of directors to federal prison for a very long time. But it was a small encrypted text file within the main folder that made Thorne's blood run cold. It was Kayla's personal log, her private thoughts on the investigation. He scrolled through the entries, his eyes catching on the last one, dated just 2 days before they boarded the yacht. Entry: "Final piece of the puzzle is on the inside. My source, Canary, is terrified but ready to talk. He has the final payment ledger that ties Augustus D directly to the chemical dumping. He's an employee on the Empress. We'll meet him on the cruise. Must be careful. Naya knows I'm onto something big, but not what. I asked her about her family's Everglades holdings, and she became defensive, evasive. It was the first time she's ever lied to me. I could see it in her eyes. I love her like a sister, but I can't shake this feeling. ND knows everything. She's either the key to breaking this whole thing open, or she's the wall standing in my way. I have to be so careful around her." Thorne leaned back in his chair, the words on the screen burning in his mind. ND is the key or the wall. Kayla had suspected her own best friend. She had walked onto this yacht knowing she was stepping into a viper's nest, armed with the truth but surrounded by lies. She had trusted Nia, her sister, not realizing that the wall she feared was about to come crashing down on top of her. The betrayal was staggering, so much more personal and vicious than simple corporate greed. This wasn't just about protecting a business. It was about silencing a friend who knew too much. The time for subtlety was over. Thorne sent a crew member to summon Nia DeMarco to the library, and this time, there was no pretense of a polite conversation. When she arrived, her expression was one of carefully controlled composure, but Thorne could see the faint tremor in her hands, the slight tension around her eyes that her practiced smile couldn't quite hide. She had changed into a simple but expensive white linen dress, as if to project an aura of innocence and purity. "Ms. DeMarco, please have a seat," Thorne said, gesturing to the chair opposite the desk. He remained standing, a deliberate power move. On the desk between them, he had placed a single printed photograph, a satellite image from Kayla's files showing a discolored, dead patch of land in the heart of the Everglades. Nia sat, her back ramrod straight. She glanced at the photo, but her expression remained neutral. "Detective, I hope you're making progress. This whole situation is just a nightmare." "The nightmares are just beginning for some," Thorne replied, his voice flat and cold. "I've been reading some of your friend's work. Fascinating stuff. She was investigating a company called DeMarco Holdings. Any relation?" A flicker of defiance sparked in Nia's eyes. "Of course, it's my family's company. This isn't a secret. Kayla knew what my family did for a living." "Oh, she knew more than that," Thorne said, circling the desk slowly, like a predator sizing up its prey. "She knew about the illegal chemical dumping. She knew about the shell corporations. She knew about the plan to build a luxury resort on poisoned, protected land. Land poisoned, as it turns out, with chemicals that kill everything they touch, including a very specific rare plant called Aconitum uncinnatum." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. "Does that name mean anything to you?" Nia's composure finally cracked. A wave of color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and fragile against the white of her dress. I don't know what you're talking about. This is insane. My father would never—" "This isn't about your father right now, Nia. This is about you," Thorne cut in, his voice sharp. "I did a little digging into your past this morning, had my people back in Miami run a background check. You weren't always a society photographer, were you? Before you decided to dedicate your life to art, you spent 2 years, post-college, working as a research assistant at the University of Florida's botany department." He let that sink in. Nia's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "And do you know what your team's primary research grant was for, Nia?" Thorne continued, relentless. "It was a federally funded study on the alkaloid properties of endemic Floridian neurotoxins. Your specific project, according to university records, was focused on the isolation and stabilization of aconitine from the wolfsbane plants found in the Everglades." He was standing directly in front of her now, looking down at her. "So, you tell me, Ms. DeMarco, what are the odds that your best friend is murdered with an incredibly rare poison derived from a plant in the Everglades, the very same land your family is trying to steal, and that you, her best friend, just happen to be one of the few people on this ship, maybe in the entire state, with the expert knowledge required to handle and weaponize that exact poison?" Nia stared at him, her eyes wide with what looked like genuine terror. "This is a setup," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Someone is trying to frame me, to frame my family. Kayla would never, she wouldn't have believed these lies." "Kayla believed in the truth," Thorne shot back, "and it got her killed." Her denial was passionate, almost convincing. For a split second, Thorne felt a sliver of doubt. Was it possible she was being framed? That Augustus had another operative on board? But Kayla's own words echoed in his mind. "ND knows everything." His secure laptop pinged. It was another message from Martinez. Subject, "Got him." Thorne opened the email. It contained a video file, an isolated clip from one of the ship's corridor security cameras. The timestamp was 9:48 p.m., minutes after Kayla had entered her room and minutes before Jamal would discover her body. The camera didn't cover Kayla's doorway directly, but it captured a section of the hallway nearby. The footage was grainy, but the image was clear enough. It showed a uniformed crew member, a young man hurrying down the hall. He stopped, looked towards Kayla's stateroom, which was just out of frame, and then his face contorted in sheer panic. He spun around and practically fled in the opposite direction. He had seen something. Or someone. Thorne now had a new target. He had Kayla's source. He had Canary. And whatever that terrified young man had seen in the hallway was about to blow Nia DeMarco's wall of lies to pieces. Finding Kayla's source, her Canary, was surprisingly easy. Thorne cross-referenced the crew manifest with the grainy CCTV footage. The young man's name was Leo Moreno, a steward who had been with the DeMarcos' charter company for less than a year. Thorne found him in the crew's mess, huddled in a corner, his face pale and clammy. The moment he saw Thorne approaching, a look of pure animal terror flashed in his eyes. Thorne didn't interrogate him in the library. He took him to a small, neutral utility closet, away from prying eyes and listening ears. He didn't want the young man to feel like a suspect. He wanted him to feel like a witness who needed protection. "Leo," Thorne began, his voice calm and reassuring. "I'm not here to get you in trouble. I know you were in contact with Kayla Robinson. I know you were helping her. Right now, you might be the only person on this ship who can help me find out who killed her." Leo stared at the floor, trembling. "I can't," he whispered, his voice hoarse with fear. "You don't understand who these people are. They'll destroy me. My family. The DeMarcos can't touch you if you're in federal witness protection," Thorne said firmly. "But I can only make that happen if you tell me what you know. Tell me what you saw last night." The promise of protection seemed to break through his fear. Leo looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of terror and resolve. "Miss Robinson, she was a good person. She promised me the money from her story would be enough for my family to move away, to start over. She just needed one last thing. The final payment ledger showing the direct transfer from Mr. DeMarco's personal account to the chemical disposal company. I had it on a thumb drive. I was supposed to bring it to her last night." He took a shaky breath, the memory replaying in his mind. "I went to her stateroom, just like we planned. The party was loud upstairs. The hallway was empty. I was about to knock, but the door was already slightly open. I thought maybe she'd left it open for me. I peeked inside." His voice dropped to a choked whisper. "She was on the floor, just lying there. Not moving. For a second I didn't understand. And then someone stepped out of the bedroom's bathroom." "Who was it, Leo?" Thorne pressed, his body tense. "It was Miss DeMarco," Leo said, the name leaving his lips like a curse. "Nia DeMarco. She didn't see me. She was looking down at Miss Robinson's body. Her face, there was no grief, detective. It was cold, calculating, like she was making sure a job was finished." Thorne felt a chill crawl up his spine. This was more than just placing Nia near the scene. This put her in the room, over the body. "What happened next?" Thorne asked. "She knelt down," Leo continued, his eyes unfocused as he relived the horror. "She reached out and picked something up off the floor next to Miss Robinson's hand. It was small, pink, a little plastic box. She looked at it for a second, then she stood up, slipped it into the pocket of her dress, and walked out of the room. She didn't even close the main door all the way. It was like she was in a trance. The pink pill box. The spare case Nia had claimed she couldn't find. The case she had likely planted the poisoned pill in. She hadn't gone to the room to get Kayla medicine. She had gone to plant the murder weapon. And after Kayla was dead, she had returned to retrieve the evidence. "I panicked," Leo confessed, shame and fear warring on his face. "I saw her, and I just ran. I knew if she saw me, I was dead too. I've been hiding ever since, just praying no one would find me." Thorne placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "You did the right thing by running, son. And you're doing the right thing by telling me this now." He now had a direct eyewitness. He had motive, means, opportunity, and now a witness placing the suspect at the scene, tampering with evidence. It was enough. It had to be enough. But he knew the DeMarco's lawyers would tear Leo's testimony apart. He was a low-level employee, an informant who took money. They would paint him as an unreliable, greedy liar. Thorne needed something more. He needed undeniable physical proof. He needed the pink pillbox. And he had a hunch that, in her panicked amateur attempt to cover her tracks, Nia DeMarco hadn't been able to dispose of it properly on a sealed ship. It had to be somewhere in her stateroom, and he knew just how he was going to find it. Thorne knew a conventional search of Nia DeMarco's stateroom might yield nothing. She was smart, calculating. She wouldn't leave the poison pillbox sitting in a drawer. If she had hidden it, she had hidden it well. He needed an edge, an advantage she couldn't have anticipated. He got on his encrypted satellite phone and made a call to his captain back in Miami. It was an unorthodox request, a logistical nightmare, but Thorne was persuasive. Less than 3 hours later, the rhythmic thumping of rotor blades echoed across the still ocean. A U.S. Coast Guard helicopter descended towards the Biscayne Empress, which had been instructed to cut its engines and hold its position. It didn't land on the yacht's helipad, which was too small but hovered expertly, a rescue basket being lowered onto the deck. Out of the basket stepped two figures, a stern-faced Miami-Dade forensics officer and a magnificent black German shepherd wearing a K9 unit vest. The dog's name was Shadow, and his specialty was not drugs or bombs, but chemical compounds. He was one of only a handful of K9s in the state trained to detect a wide range of rare toxins and accelerants, including the specific botanical alkaloids found in wolfsbane. The arrival of the helicopter, the police dog, and the official forensics gear sent a clear message to everyone on board, especially the DeMarcos. This was no longer a private matter to be handled discreetly. This was a full-blown Miami-Dade homicide investigation. Thorne, with the forensics officer and Shadow's handler, proceeded to Nia's stateroom. Nia was sequestered in the ship's lounge, under the watchful eye of the ship's security, her protests about illegal searches and harassment falling on deaf ears. Thorne now had a maritime warrant signed by a federal judge, transmitted electronically to the captain. They entered her room. It was immaculate, decorated in serene shades of cream and blue. It smelled faintly of expensive perfume and ocean air. "Okay, let him work," Thorne said to the handler. The handler unsnapped Shadow's leash. "Seek!" he commanded, his voice sharp and clear. Shadow began to move through the room with a quiet, focused intensity. He swept his nose over the carpet, along the baseboards, across the bedding. He sniffed at Nia's luggage, her clothes, the contents of her vanity. He showed a passing interest in a bottle of chemical-heavy hairspray, but moved on. The forensics officer began a more traditional search, carefully bagging Nia's toiletries and checking for hidden compartments in her suitcases. Thorne watched the dog, his hopes sinking with every passing moment. Maybe she had managed to throw it overboard. Maybe his hunch was wrong. Shadow completed his sweep of the main room and the bathroom and gave his handler a look that seemed to say, "Nothing here." "Check again," the handler commanded. Shadow started over, this time more slowly. He passed by the luggage, the bed, the bathroom. Then he paused in a corner of the room near the balcony door. There was a large, decorative ceramic pot holding an ornate, leafy fiddle leaf fig tree. It was the kind of generic, high-end hotel decoration meant to add a touch of life to the room. Shadow stopped in front of it. His body went rigid. His tail, which had been relaxed, became a stiff, straight line. He let out a low growl, then a single sharp bark, his eyes fixed on the base of the plant. "What is it, boy?" the handler asked, moving closer. Shadow barked again, more insistently, pawing at the rich, dark soil in the pot. Thorne's heart leaped. He moved to the planter, the forensics officer right behind him, pulling on a pair of latex gloves. Thorne looked at the officer and nodded. Carefully, the officer began to dig into the soil with his gloved fingers. About 3 inches down, his fingers hit something hard and smooth. He gently excavated the dirt around it, revealing a small object wrapped in plastic. He lifted it out. It was a single latex glove, tightly wrapped around something. With painstaking care, the officer unwrapped the glove. And there, nestled in the palm, covered in dirt but otherwise perfectly intact, was the pink pillbox. A collective breath was let out in the room. Thorne felt a wave of cold triumph. This was the nail in the coffin. A desperate, amateurish hiding place. She must have panicked after Leo Moreno saw her, realizing she couldn't risk walking the decks to throw it overboard, so she buried it, thinking no one would ever look in a potted plant. The forensics officer carefully opened the small plastic box. Inside, sitting on a bed of dark soil, was a single two-tone pharmaceutical capsule. It was the dose of poison Nia had removed from her own box when she'd made the switch. She had not only failed to dispose of the container, she had failed to dispose of the murder weapon itself. Shadow sat patiently by his handler's side, thumping his tail softly on the carpet, unaware that his incredible sense of smell had just solved a murder and brought down an empire. Thorne didn't want the final confrontation to happen in a sterile interrogation room. He wanted it to happen in the open, in front of the people whose lives had been shattered. He gathered the key players in the Yacht's grand dining salon. Jamal and Aidan Turner, sitting side by side, united in their grief. Augustus DeMarco, his face an impassive granite mask, flanked by the ship's captain, and Nia, who was escorted in, looking small and defiant in the cavernous, silent room. On the long, polished mahogany table, Thorne laid out his evidence like a royal flush in a high-stakes poker game. A photo of the note from Kayla's laptop. ND is the key or the wall. A printed copy of the university record detailing Nia's toxicology research. A still frame from the security camera showing Leo Moreno's terrified face. And finally, the centerpiece. The dirt-caked pink pillbox, resting in a sealed evidence bag. "We're all here," Thorne began, his voice echoing slightly in the silent room, "because Kayla Robinson was murdered 2 nights ago. She wasn't the victim of a random act of violence or a tragic accident. She was executed, silenced by someone who had everything to lose if she published the truth." He looked directly at Augustus DeMarco. "She was executed because she had discovered that DeMarco Holdings, under your leadership, was systematically poisoning a national park for profit. She had the proof, the bank records, the witnesses, enough to send you and your entire board to prison for the rest of your lives. That's the motive." Augustus didn't flinch. "These are baseless, ludicrous allegations, Detective." "Are they?" Thorne countered, shifting his gaze to Nia. Kayla's best friend, her sister, the one person she trusted on this boat. But Kayla was smart. She started to suspect you. She noted that you became evasive and defensive when she asked about the Everglades. She knew you were a wall she might have to break through. He then laid out the means. The murder weapon was a highly sophisticated poison, aconitine, extracted from a rare plant, a poison that requires expert knowledge to handle, the kind of knowledge one might acquire, say, while working as a research assistant in a university botany lab specializing in that exact field of study. Nia's facade of defiance began to crumble. Her lower lip trembled. "Then there's the opportunity," Thorne continued, his voice relentless. "Kayla has a migraine. You, her loving friend, offer to get her spare medicine. You go to her room alone. You later claim you couldn't find her pillbox. But what really happened, Nia? Did you go there to help her, or did you go there to switch her real medication with a poison pill you had prepared? A pill you placed in her primary pillbox, knowing her migraine was so bad she wouldn't think twice before taking it. This is ridiculous. You have no proof," Nia cried out, her voice high and strained. "Oh, but I do," Thorne said softly. He gestured to the evidence bag. "We found this, buried in a potted plant in your stateroom. Your attempt to hide it was clever, but not clever enough." He then detailed Leo Moreno's eyewitness account, seeing her in the room, over the body, taking the pillbox. The weight of it all, the motive, the knowledge, the lies, the witness, the physical proof, finally broke her. Nia DeMarco collapsed in on herself, burying her face in her hands, her body racked with deep, gut-wrenching sobs. Jamal stared at her, his face a mixture of horror and disbelief. "Nia?" he whispered, the name catching in his throat. "Why? She loved you? She trusted you?" Nia looked up, her face streaked with tears and mascara, her eyes wild with a desperate, tragic light. "You don't understand," she wailed, her voice cracking. "She was going to destroy him, our whole family, everything we've ever built. My father, he's dedicated his whole life to this company. She was going to send him to jail, ruin our name. I couldn't let that happen." "So you killed your best friend to protect your father?" Aidan asked, his voice dripping with disgust. The final shocking twist came not from Nia, but from Augustus. Throughout his daughter's confession, he hadn't moved a muscle. His face remained a cold, unreadable slate. Thorne had assumed Naya was acting on his orders, a loyal soldier protecting her king. But Naya, in her final desperate plea for understanding, turned to her father. "I did it for you, Daddy," she cried. "I did what you didn't have the stomach to do. I protected the family. I protected your legacy. Aren't you proud of me now? Don't you see I'm worthy of the DeMarco name?" The room fell into a stunned silence. She hadn't been following orders. She had been on a twisted, desperate audition, a pathetic attempt to win the approval of a man who had clearly withheld it her entire life. Augustus DeMarco finally looked at his daughter. There was no flicker of gratitude, no hint of fatherly compassion. There was only ice. He looked at her as if she were a faulty piece of machinery, a liability that needed to be managed. He said nothing. His silence was more damning than any confession, a chilling testament to the cold, empty heart of the empire he had built, an empire his own daughter had committed murder to protect, all for a love she would never receive. The return journey to Miami was a silent, somber procession. The Biscayne Empress, once a symbol of opulent escape, now felt like a funeral barge. Federal agents met the yacht at the port, and Nia DeMarco was led away in handcuffs, her face pale and empty, the enormity of her actions finally crashing down upon her. The story exploded across the news, a sordid tale of high society murder, corporate greed, and unthinkable betrayal. The DeMarco dynasty became the DeMarco crime family overnight. A few months later, the relentless Florida sun beat down on the windows of Jamal Turner's downtown law office. The view was of the same glittering skyline they had left behind on that fateful day. On his desk, among stacks of legal briefs and case files, sat a thick binder labeled Project Canary. It contained all of Kayla's research, meticulously organized, the evidence she had died to protect. Next to it was a framed photo of them on a beach, their faces bright with laughter, their futures seemingly as vast and clear as the ocean behind them. The door opened without a knock. Aiden walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. The past few months had forged a new, deeper bond between the brothers, one tempered in shared grief and a common purpose. "You sure you're ready for this?" Aiden asked quietly, nodding towards the binder. The preliminary hearing against Augustus DeMarco and the board of DeMarco Holdings was scheduled for the following week. Jamal, working with federal prosecutors, was leading the civil case on behalf of the environmental groups Kayla had been secretly feeding information to. "I have to be," Jamal said, his voice firm. The hollowed-out look he'd worn for weeks was gone, replaced by a quiet, burning resolve. It's what she would have done. She never backed down. He picked up the binder, its weight feeling both heavy and sacred in his hands. He was no longer just a community lawyer. He was the keeper of Kayla's legacy. He would be her voice in the courtroom, ensuring her work saw the light of day, that her sacrifice was not in vain. "She'd be so proud of you, man," Aiden said, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. Jamal nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He looked at Kayla's smiling face in the photograph. "You know the craziest part of all this?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Nia really did love her. I know she did. Their friendship was real. I saw it for years. But she loved the idea of her family, the power and the name, even more, fear and loyalty. They're a dangerous cocktail. They can make you do monstrous things to protect a monster." Aiden squeezed his shoulder. "But the truth always finds a way out," he said, echoing a sentiment Kayla had often expressed. She believed that. Now it's our turn to prove her right. Jamal took one last look at the photograph, then closed the binder with a decisive snap. He placed it in his briefcase. Kayla couldn't finish her final story, but he would. It was more than just seeking justice for her murder. It was about honoring her life by completing her mission. It was his final act of love, his last enduring promise to the woman who had changed his world. The story of the Biscayne Empress became a chilling parable. It taught that the most profound betrayals often come not from our enemies, but from those who claim to love us. It revealed that loyalty, when pledged to a corrupt or undeserving cause, ceases to be a virtue and becomes a weapon. And it served as a stark reminder that while power, wealth, and prejudice can build empires that seem impenetrable, they are no match for the enduring power of a single, courageous voice telling the truth, even if that voice must ultimately echo from beyond the grave.